Alright, let's talk about how to say this in Old Norse. This what might say some smart aleck if there are people who watch these videos, and I do mean precisely this, the word this. Now, as you would expect in Old Norse, it's not just one word that you apply no matter what, but the word this or these is going to vary depending on gender, number, and case. So our forms of the word this are thessi, thenna, thessa, thessum, thessir, thessa, thessara, thessum. Thessi, thessa, thessar, thessi, thessar, thessar, thessara, thessum. Thetta, thetta, thessa, thessu, thessi, thessi, thessara, thessum. Now, those are kind of the standard, most usual forms you will encounter in reading Old Norse literature from the period when most Old Norse literature is written down in the 1200s, your sagas and eddas. There are some archaic forms that you'll see here and there. Chief among those is sjo. Yes, this looks like C, right, as in 2C. Sjo in the masculine and feminine nominative singular is an archaic form you will sometimes see. So instead of thessi mother, you'll sometimes see sjo mother. Instead of thessi kona, you'll sometimes see sjo kona. You will certainly encounter that, for example, in Eddic poetry and some other more archaic kind of language. Occasionally in neuter dative singular, you'll see a form thvisa. That's also pretty archaic. And then on the other end, for being archaic, you'll sometimes see forms that kind of get a little bit closer to modern Icelandic in the feminine genitive singular and feminine dative singular. Later texts may have thesarar and thesari instead of just thesar and thessi. But in general, if you learn these forms, they are kind of unique, right? I mean, this doesn't look too much like how anything else works. They will be mostly pretty consistent through the literary period. Now, just keep in mind that like the word the or the word that, so, these will be used with adjectives that have weak, or with nouns that have weak adjectives. So you'll talk about thessi go the mother using the weak adjective because thessi is specifying it. However, just like with the or that, remember that you don't use the weak adjective if it's separated from the noun it's describing by the verb be or become, vera or verða. So you do say thessi maður góður, this person is good, right, using the strong adjective, but it's weak if it's in the same clause with this, that, or these. So thessi góði maður. All right. Now, thessi is something you just have to learn the endings of. It's not going to go away, but it's also perhaps not as common as the or that. And sometimes they will use that in a way that's a little bit closer to how we would use this in English. You're sometimes just going to have to make that judgment call if you're trying to produce a translation and say, well, you know, here the word's being used as saw or some form of saw, but in English we'd really say this instead of that here. Those are pretty minor issues. The endings, once you learn them, you're good to go. Just be watchful for those more archaic and more modernized forms you'll occasionally encounter. Now, after a quick word from my sponsor, I'll talk about a couple other things to be watchful for that I've talked about on Patreon a little bit, but not with the general audience yet. Okay, now here's the other thing for today. I've already gone over some of this with Patreon, but even if you're on Patreon, this will be a little bit of new information, new examples about this. So we talked about sick and ser and seen, the reflexive personal pronouns, right? Meaning himself, yourself, itself. Now, that can also be suffixed to verbs to make the verb in question have the same object as subject. Now, that can mean reflexive verbs, right? Something I do to myself. Or it can mean reciprocal verbs, right? So if there's a plural subject, it can mean does to each other. I'm going to give you several examples using different verbs so you can see what I mean. So, for example, berja means to fight, although it's rarely used without the suffix sk, which is from the reflexive pronoun sk, sick. So, þeir berjast og fellir hver annan. They fight each other, the sk making it reciprocal, right? And each fells another, so each kills another. It can be kind of close to passive in sense. Let's look at finna, which means to find. So, for example, we can see an active example of that in a phrase like finna þeir í grasinu gul tovler. They find golden playing pieces in the grass. But mor dumi finnast with the suffix til þess. So many examples find themselves almost for this. Now there, that's almost basically passive, and so you can almost say something like many examples are found for this. But you have to judge from context, and that reciprocal sense will be more common than true passives like this. Another thing that's pretty close to a true passive, halda means hold. It takes a dative direct object, by the way. So when you look at something like en Thor helt hammarskapinu, but Thor held the hammer shaft, that's normal active. Add the sk and you get something like skal han haldask med helju, he shall be held with hell. This is effectively a passive, because it's not exactly anybody's holding him, but he is being held. Nevna means name, so Thennan os thirfti egi at nemna, one need not name this god, but hon nevndisk thok, she named herself Thok. She said her name was Thok. Fella means hide, so here's an example with the actual full word form sig. Han falsik o fjalli nokru. He hid himself on a certain mountain. But we also see han falsk. He hid himself, right? He hid, right? You would use, without the sk, han fall something else, right? Han fall sverd, right? He hid a sword. But han falsk, he hid himself with that reciprocal sk. Snua means to turn, so we see it normally. Hon gatir mjok till at snua hugum mana til osta. She is very concerned with turning the thoughts of people to love. But throw that sk on there and we can get something reflexive. Han snusk after at skates enda. He turns himself backwards to his tail's end. So this is about Jormungandr, the snake that encircles the earth. He turns himself, right? He is turned back toward his tail's end. Sjol means see. Thor ser war lo mother. Thor sees where a man lay, but han sesk mer he sees more around. He looks around himself, in fact. So if you see a preposition like that you can almost take the sk as meaning there's like a sick that follows that preposition. So you can read han sesk mer is basically han ser mer sick. He looks around himself more. Dvelja is to delay. Han dvalvisk veterlangt. He delayed himself through the whole winter long. Festa means to fasten, to attach. So ekki naven festisk vid han. No name would attach to him. No name was attached to him. Again, pretty close to passive in sense. Hitta is to meet. Hittumk ivik varens. We will meet one another in varens bay. So I'm going to give you some readings at the end of this video with forms of thesi and then some of these verbs with sk or mk, umsk attached to the end, so you can see these things kind of in the wild and practice your reading skills. And in the meantime, beautiful Colorado, I'll be wishing you all the best.